So cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for being
Yeah, we've been talking about this for a while, so
I know, we have.
it's nice to finally get together. I know, you know, the news cycles have been dominated, and rightfully so, by what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, and you know, I know that's weighing on a lot of us right now, and hoping for the best.
Yeah, it's like one heavy thing after another.
Yeah.
And it's just felt like that. I mean, how do you, that's a good question too, because I know when I talked to you a few weeks ago after Amir Luck died, that was such a heavy, intense situation. How do you process these things after all these years?
Well, it's tough. It's really tough, and you know, the weight of the office which I hold and the responsibilities that I have and chiefs across the country have are significant, and there's a lot at stake. You know, whether you get it right or wrong really can impact the community in such significant ways. So it's a heavy job. Sometimes this job as chief can be a bit of a lonely job. I often tell people about the difference between the assistant chief and the chief. I thought at the time when I was the assistant chief that, you know, it's not that big of a leap. But once you get into the position as chief and you have the final decisions, there are no more layers of accountability, that weight gets a little heavy, and the consequences, as I said, of those decisions really can impact the community in these significant ways. So I think about every incident across the country that has happened, good and bad, where police are involved in great things across the country, and specifically in St. Paul, and then when things don't go bad. And I reflect on the times in St. Paul where things haven't gone as well as they could have gone. And I'm really proud of the fact that our culture in St. Paul, and who I am as a human being, has always been a person to take responsibility for what has happened, and to understand really deeply the power of an apology, especially from a chief of police when things go wrong, is critical in order to heal and move forward after things go bad.
And what's been most humbling in that regard? When do you feel like you've had to say, hey, I learned from this?
Well, many times. I mean, you're a human being. We all have jobs. We all make good decisions at times, and some decisions you reflect on as could have been different. I reflect on the first day on the job as chief in St. Paul and the horrific incident on the east side where we had Frank Baker, who was sitting in his vehicle after work talking on his phone, and officers responded to a shots fired call in the area. Mr. Baker was apprehended on his leg. He had nothing to do with that call for service that night, and the canine was attached to his leg for a significant amount of time. Another officer kicked him 3 times in the ribs, and he ended up in the hospital. And I remember getting a call from some dear friends at the NAACP about this incident. I directly went to the hospital and met with the family, some family members from Chicago, and I looked at Mr. Baker, and he looked at me, and he was in really tough shape at the time. And I remember what he said to me as he looked at me and said, you know, Chief, I can see maybe the dog biting my leg, but the officer that kicked me 3 times in the ribs, that was way over the top. And I remember, again, this being the first day at the job, and then feeling terrible for what happened to this human being.
And at that point, do you take responsibility or feel
Oh,
like
absolutely. Deep responsibility, because it's my police department. I am the head of the organization. The buck stops at my desk. And so what I found out was Mr. Baker was at the Rondo Library, where I was announced as the 41st Chief of Police back in May of 2016. And I told him and his family that I would do the right thing. I will investigate, I will find out what happened. And rest assured that the truth will prevail and I will take actions if necessary. Because at the time I didn't know what happened, right? So through an investigation, and Mr. Baker and his family told me that they trusted me at the time, and they didn't say a word about this because they had confidence in the St. Paul Police Department and me as chief to keep it quiet. So it was never in the media. They knew that we were going to do the right thing, and in fact we did the right thing. We issued significant discipline. I upward departed from the recommendations of the Police Civilian Review Internal Affairs Commission. And I did apologize when I knew what happened to Mr. Baker and his family, and just as importantly, the community. And I'm proud of that being our continued approach. And again, that was one very, very terrible, bad incident that resulted in a lot of withdrawals from our Bank of Trust. And I often talk about the importance of the Bank of Trust philosophy in any organization, and specifically policing, that everything that we do should be designed to make deposits into the Bank of Trust with our community. And it can take one bad incident to happen to take your entire bank account, and that you have to start rebuilding immediately. But you know, I was really proud of the fact of how this turned out. We had to pay a significant amount of money from our police department, and since then we have reformed our entire use of force approach. The trainers in our department have done an incredible job. We have reformed our canine unit as a result of that incident, and we have reduced our use of force significantly, making sure officers are more safe, less injuries to officers. Kicks and strikes are down significantly, 60+%. Our civil liability payouts for police misconduct over the last few years, specifically 2019 and 2020, was $24,000 and $5,000 respectively. So we're in the right direction here in St. Paul, and we're really proud of that fact. And again, but all of the great things that happen as a result of the women and men of our department, their incredible work, can be taken away with one bad incident.
And I feel like just over the past period, like when we think about trust, we think about officer-involved shootings. That's what comes to mind. And I know there's been 28 in St. Paul since 2000 where someone died. What does it feel like from your end when you hear about an officer-involved shooting and that someone has been killed by a police officer?
The first thing that comes to my mind, and that's the most tragic, heart-wrenching call that I get as a chief of police. And normally it's at nighttime when I get a call, but I can say it's very rare in St. Paul. Since I became chief, I think of the officer-involved shootings that we've had that have resulted in death. Every one of them was tragic. The family lost a loved one. The officers' lives in our department have been changed forever. But I also look at the facts. And the facts are, out of the officer-involved shootings resulting in death we've had in St. Paul since I become chief, the first one, a person shot up their apartment with a significant other. He ended up outside and pointed a weapon at our officers twice, and he was tragically shot and killed. Another one, a man on the east side, again had shot up his home, and left, was walking down the street, and turned and fired around at our officers, and they had to shoot and kill him, tragically. Another one over here, about less than a mile away from where we are right now, a young man came downstairs saying he was going to kill the officers and pointed a weapon at the officers. They shot and killed him. Another one over here, again, about a mile up the road here, where an officer was patrolling a neighborhood, was rear-ended by a man who came out of his vehicle and attacked the officer with a knife, knocking him down to the ground, and kept coming at the officer. Officer defended himself and shot and killed that man. Again, tragically, the loss of life and family is devastated, and an officer's life changes forever. so these things happen, and what's really frustrating for me when these things happen, sometimes the calls from, not all, but a few of our activists are an overreaction because they don't have the facts. But for whatever reason, they try to spin up the vitriol and the turmoil in our community without having the facts.
Well, what about, okay, just thinking back in your law enforcement career, I know from me reporting on crime for 16 years, officer-involved shootings have become much more prevalent. It wasn't a story I did as often as I do now. As you kind of get to the tail end of your career and you look back, what do you think could be done so that police kill fewer people?
Well, first of all, again, I want to just get back to the point of more times by far when I look through our St. Paul lens, all of the officer-involved shootings that I have been aware of since I've become chief that resulted in death were tragic, and when looking at the facts, a reasonable use of force. However, we have taken an approach in St. Paul to do a few things. We have focused on de-escalation training, crisis intervention training, EPIC, ethical policing is courageous, and moral courage training. We also focus on, first and foremost, hiring the heart of a guardian. A person who wants to become a police officer has to show me as the chief that they have a heart of a guardian first and foremost, and not the mentality of wanting to be a warrior all of the time. And there's a difference. There are times when a fraction of the job that we have require an officer to turn on that warrior training in a chaotic situation when shots are being fired and community members are in danger. But 99.98% of the time, less than 0.2% of all of our calls for service in St. Paul result in a use of force. We're really proud of that, and that's the fact. The fact is less than 0.2% of all of our calls for service result in a use of force, and much of that is very low-level force, like maybe an escort hold into a handcuff, a compliant handcuff on a suspect. But we have to do a better job as our entire community, all of us, to look at the facts before we let the emotion take over the true facts of any situation.
And as a human, obviously you look at everything too through your years of law enforcement experience, but when you saw the video of George Floyd being killed, how did that fall on you?
That was a heavy, heavy day. One of the worst days of my career when I saw that video. It was gut-wrenching to see that a sworn police officer anywhere in this country and anywhere in this world for that matter would react in that way to that situation. And I knew that it was going to take everything that every department across this country has done to build their bank of trust. That one incident, we were all overdrawn throughout the entire country.
It affected every department.
Every department. Every single department. And as a human, it really pissed me off beyond any description that I could give you right now. I remember talking with our officers. Our officers were also devastated by what they saw in Minneapolis. They knew their job was going to be much more difficult. We had officers in tears over what happened in moments of, a vulnerability between me personally as a human being, first and foremost, and having some discussions about what happened in Minneapolis.
Could you look right away and identify that that was not protocol, whether it was your department or someone else's?
Oh, unquestionably. I mean, it doesn't take it doesn't take a police use of force expert. It doesn't take a police chief or a police officer or any human being to not see the wrong that had happened in that incident. And shortly after that incident, I wrote a message on social media, Facebook, about my thoughts on that. And I remember clearly telling our department and any department across the country that would listen that if you see this video and in any way, shape, or form believe that that is a reasonable use of force, please get a hold of me because you can turn your badge in. And nobody took me up on it because I believe everyone in our department knew that that was outrageous and unconscionable behavior from someone who is sworn to protect the peace and maintain public safety in our community.
So you saw that. You see why there is more distrust in police officers.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I do, and I know. I know very well the history of policing in our country and how that throughout history has had negative and disparate impacts on communities of color. That's the truth, that's the reality. And it's really important to me as the chief to make sure that all of the officers who we hire, and again, hiring the heart first and foremost, are educated and understand not just the history of, but how that history impacted how our communities and communities of color view policing in America. And if we don't understand that, if we don't understand that we all have bias, we're never going to figure out a way to move forward in this profession. Every start of our academy, I meet with the recruits on the first day. One of the questions I ask them is, raise your hand if you possess implicit bias. You know, some, they don't know what to do, but some will lift their hand, some won't. And I say, whoever doesn't lift your hand, you know, you're full of it. Because if you are a human being, a human condition is to possess implicit bias. It's okay to understand that we have implicit bias. What's not okay is to not understand how our bias potentially affects the job that we do. To be able to take a step back and check ourselves on how our bias could potentially be impacting the job that we do and how we interact with our community. So we focus on that heavily, which is why we have our ethical policing is courageous, our implicit bias training on an annual basis. And we committed to all of these, proudly, all of these initiatives before any mandates happen at the state for implicit bias and de-escalation trainings.
Looking back at 2016 when you took the job, I know it was right on your top 3 priority list to diversify the police department. And you had a lot of success in that. Tell me about that.
Yeah, we're really proud of the fact that we have increased our diversity significantly over the last 4 years. And again, making sure that we're hiring the heart and a police officer who reflects the community and reflects the community's values. So we've gone up significantly in the officers of color in our community, and our community is really starting to see the impact of that now when officers show up to...
What is the impact of hiring a diverse board?
Well, what it does is it brings more credibility and more trust, which is critically important. Without trust, which has to be one of the main pillars of any police organization, any organization across the country, without trust in this line of business, you're viewed as nothing more than an occupying force. So part of building that trust is to make sure that people see officers who look like them in our community, young people in our community who are trying to recruit to be the future police officers in this community, to have that hope and inspiration as they see young officers in our community who reflect who they are and their values, and they're from their neighborhoods and their parents know their parents. And that's been one of the most fulfilling parts of my time as chief, is to see the transformation of our department, and watching the investments that we've made in young people with our junior police academies, right?
That's worked, right?
It has worked. I was very proud of the fact that I started the Junior Police Academy in St. Paul with our YWCA in 2007. And now to see some of the young people in our East African Junior Police Academy that we've had over the years, last week to be able to pin the badge on another one of the graduates of the East African Junior Police Academy was just a moment that I'll never forget. And I've been able to do that many times since I've become chief now, to see our young people who I used to put my arm around and say, I want you to make me a promise that someday I can pin a badge on you. And they're, yes, chief, we're going to do that. And that just to see that happens now, it almost brings you to tears.
This goes deep, your passion to unify people who are black and people who are white in this city. Where does that come from?
It came from great parents, who taught me at a very young age how important respect was. And that has resonated through my whole life.
And that's important, right? Like, that's one of your core values.
It is, yeah. Service, respect, and trust really are the things that come to mind with who I am and the values that I brought to the police department.
And that comes from your parents?
It sure does, yeah. You know, showing up, being engaged, caring, getting up early, staying up late, doing your part, bringing people together. And the first 8 years of my life was growing up in a trailer park in Northfield. You know, at the time, you know, we didn't have a lot of money, but I felt like the richest kid in town. So it's been wonderful.
When you think about July and you wake up in the morning and you're not putting that badge on, what do you think will be the hardest part of not being chief?
I don't know yet. You know, it's certainly bittersweet. It's been a great career in St. Paul, 33 years of friendships.
So why now?
Well, it's time. It's just time for me to move on to something else and help other organizations bring the bank of trust philosophy into their worlds, and use the talents and the experiences that I've gained as a police officer and the St. Paul Police Chief to help other organizations. And we're ready. The thing that makes the St. Paul Police Department so different than many others throughout the country, and I hear this often from people, is the St. Paul Police Department has a different feel from other police departments throughout the country, is that we have always raised our own in this police department. And every chief that has come before me has left the department better than they found it. In the last 33 years, this is what I know. This is what I've observed. And the culture and everything about the St. Paul Police Department comes from within. And we stand on the shoulders of the chiefs and the women and men of the police department who've come before us to try to make it better. So it's a 6-year term of office in St. Paul. And I am absolutely ready to move on and allow the next generation, the next chief, to step up and make this department better than they found it. There's a lot more that can be done in any organization, and the moment that you think that there's nothing else that can be done, you're in trouble, and that organization is in trouble. So I'm going to stay here in St. Paul. This is my town. This is my city. I'm going to continue to live here. I'm going to continue to contribute in every way I can in every corner of this city to try to make it better and be available. You're going to see me in this coffee shop. You're going to see me up at Mungtown. You're going to see me at the grocery stores and businesses throughout this city, doing everything I can as a citizen to make it better. You don't have to be a police chief to make the world better. I look forward to making the world better as a citizen.
You'll keep serving?
I sure will.
I can tell. I can tell. Also, too, just thinking back, when I was looking back again to 2016, one other thing I wanted to ask you about. I know that you've always had a passion, and we talked about this after the mass shooting, of trying to lower gun violence and guns. What is your take on where that stands? I mean, we've seen violence escalate over the past couple of years.
Yeah, tragically in St. Paul and across the country, we see rising trends in people injured by gunfire, right? And what I'm seeing is a common theme are younger adults who are getting their hands on guns and settling their disputes. There's disputes much over disrespect and some gang activity, and they're settling those disputes over gunfire. I often say that yesterday's fist fights are today's gunfights, and there are more guns on the streets today that are ending up in the hands of people who shouldn't be carrying them and aren't legal to own them. So it continues to be a challenge, and making sure we create an environment that there's less gun violence continues to be a priority, and one that our new chief is going to have to significantly work on as well.
Because you're engrossed, I mean, I know you spend a lot of time engrossed in this subject and trying to get to the core of it. I mean, do you think gun control could help? What do you think could help here? Is it the court systems? What's happening? Is it early intervention with kids?
Well, there are several things, and I know this can be such a divisive topic about, when you talk about gun control, but I think there are some really common sense gun safety measures that we should look at. The universal background checks, to me, seems like a no-brainer, making sure that if people have a significant mental illness or convicted felons from purchasing a weapon, like right now, if I, as a private citizen, can sell a gun to you with no paperwork, and I don't know anything about, your background or your capacity to carry a weapon, to me that's a gap, and that's something that we could, is just common sense that we could work on. And this comes from a kid that, after Northfield, we moved to Silver Bay on the North Shore, and we went grouse hunting and rabbit hunting after school. Oftentimes we lived right in the woods, so I always had a .410 shotgun propped up in the corner of my bedroom at age 13. Now that was just how it was there. So it's not, I don't come from a space of trying to take people's guns away, but there are common sense gun approaches that we could do to keep people more safe in our communities.